Thank you, and welcome back to the special business meeting for District of Squamish. Today is Tuesday, April 18th. And please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have any concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. We are now on to item 4A, which is first three readings, and we have a financial plan amendment that will be introduced by our financing team. So I will pass over to you to introduce yourself and the topic.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Mayor Hereford, Council, members of the community who have joined us today. My name is Heather Boxer, General Manager of Financial Services, and my pronouns are she, her, so I can be addressed accordingly. I'm joined today by Roland Russell, our Senior Financial Analyst, who will be walking us through the 2023 to 2027 Financial Plan Spring Amendment. As well, we have several of our budget managers online or here in council chambers to answer any project-specific questions you may have. So the community charter provides municipalities the ability to amend their financial plan bylaw at any time to allow municipalities to react and to adapt to changing circumstances within the municipality's fiscal year. A financial plan amendment, a financial plan bylaw amendment is common practice, although best practice is to reserve this option for instances when the financial plan is substantially impacted and critical projects are incapable of progressing with an amendment without an amendment to the financial plan. Two important impacts of amending a financial plan should be noted. So amending the financial plan takes significant resources to complete, and public sector accounting standards omits the amended budget from being incorporated into the budget column of the statement of operations on the external financial statements. It's important to note that the scheduled carry forward financial plan amendment adopted earlier this year is separate and distinct from this amendment, and the carry forward is incorporated into the external financial statements as a regular part of the financial planning process. So a few key points to highlight is that this amendment is being recommended so that the district can adapt to impact as a result of cost escalations, project scope changes, supplier availability, emergency expenditure requirements that occurred in the first quarter of 2023. The amendment counts for changes to projects in flight in 2023 only. Further project changes to future year projects will be incorporated into the 2024 to 2028 financial planning cycle. It's also important to note that the recommended budget amendment does not impact the 2023 revenue tax revenue requirement. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Russell to take you through the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council, members of the public. My name is Roland Russell, and I will be walking you through a presentation this afternoon on our spring amendment. So first off, this more or less summarizes what Ms. Boxford had just spoken about. Here's the highlights of the amendment process. Council must authorize the financial plan, and for us to spend money should be in the plan. Here's a number of reasons why the plan could be changed, and we will step through a number of those and highlight some of the major projects that come into play with respect to these various items. So with no further ado, let's go right to the top. Projects with cost escalation. Well, the largest cost escalation we've experienced so far in our financial plan is for the new public works facility, and that is cost escalation from a Class C estimate to a Class B estimate. The difference is $10.6 million. So that's from $26.4 million to $37 million. Okay. Projects with funding changes. Probably the largest project that we're experiencing here with funding change is twofold. Wastewater treatment plant upsize for growth. This project is a DCC funded project, but what we are requesting and what we're proposing is that the funding be moved from DCC, so developer cost charges, to debt. supported by developer cost charges. We'll explain the rationale for that shortly. This is the other project with a significant cost escalation. The overall cost escalation on this project from the 2022 financial plan, so i.e. what we thought was going to be the price of this project when we started our 2023 budget deliberations last June was $13.2 million. This project is now costing $20.2 million. So again, a very significant cost escalation associated with this project. The other project that we would like to highlight, or one other project that we would like to highlight here, is budget approvals, which require, approvals of budgets for items which are externally funded. So upper Judd Slough dike raising. And I use this term to lop off about 7 other words that are associated with this dike raising, but it's upper Jimmy Slough. And what has occurred here is we have a placeholder that we put into our financial plan every year for $4 million for annual flood protection. And that allows us to go forward and apply for grants and design projects, to meet the varying needs that we have throughout the community. And so when we put in an application for a grant application and it is being received favorably, so we're getting an indication that this has some promise, we can move forward with the design aspects of that project. And this is one of the projects. So what we've done is we've taken out the 24 and 25 annual flood protection funding for $8 million, and we've replaced it with a grant funded project. So based on a grant that we've applied for, this grant has not been made official, for this project, $4 million, and then we will put up the other $1.5 million ourselves to put together a total project of $5.5 million. Continuing on with this, other significant projects that we've seen were projects with scope changes. And in this instance, we applied for a grant to extend the upgrade program that is currently underway at the Adventure Center, and to allow us to do more work, both in the interior and exterior of that building, in keeping with the work that we are currently doing. So those are the major changes from capital program. We wanted to highlight some of the major expenditures from an emergency standpoint, probably the biggest one being Queensway lift station replacement. So what occurred here is the lift station failed in January. We had a project in our plan called lift station rehabilitation for $1.4 million. We've converted that project to a new project designated as the Queensway lift station replacement, taken that $1.4 million, taken $600,000 in funding that would have otherwise been spent on wastewater main renewals, and created a $2 million project. That $2 million project reflects the cost of replacing the Queensway lift station on the basis of its failure earlier this year. So that's a fairly significant project. It was one that we were planning on doing. We were actually going to do the work on Queensway this year. It just stopped working before we actually got a chance to repair it. And as a result of that, it's more expensive than it would have been had we been able to get in there a little sooner. Unfortunate, but stuff happens. Also a case where we incurred emergency operating expenditures. around $250,000. And that's with the failure of the station, of the lift station. We needed to ensure that we weren't backing sewage up into the system and into people's basements. So we needed to bring in vac trucks, etc., and basically loop around the lift station so that we could continue the sanitary system could continue to work in it based on its design. So obviously that's not something that's in your day-to-day plans, and you hope you never have to do that, but sometimes things break. So those are additional emergency expenditures associated with that. The additional operating expenses, those will be funded from draws against the wastewater reserve. Basically, at the end of the day, they will have a smaller surplus than they would have otherwise, and so they will be putting less money into the reserve than they would have anticipated based on these additional expenses. And the last item is the at the aquatic center, the pull pack air exchanger failed, and that was replaced. It should be noted that there are 2 units. One unit has been replaced as an emergency, and that was done late February, early March, I believe. And the second unit will be replaced as part of the normal during the normal pool shutdown, which occurs in August, September of the year. It should also be noted, which probably has been brought to council's attention, that although there's a bit of a chloriney smell in the pool for a while there, it was not hazardous to staff or otherwise, and met all air quality requirements. So I'm going to jump forward to the next slide, which summarizes a batch of the other adjustments that we've made. So in addition to those larger projects, there's also a number of smaller projects where the amounts and the changes, which are all listed within your RTC, within your report, have taken place. These are items where we've changed financing, where we might have had small scale price escalations, such as at Brenham Park Arena, we're going to do some work on the ice plant, and the results of our RFP came in higher than our budget, so we needed to hold that until we got the budget amendment through and requested additional funding. So those types of things which occur, and they have been included here. And at this point, I will pause for a moment and I will ask council for their direction. We could pause here and ask questions related to the capital component, or I could continue through with the special operating cost components of the spring amendment. What would be your preference?
Let's pause for questions here, just so we can try to compartmentalize the questions if we can. Council, questions on anything that we've heard so far in the presentation? Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, a few questions. Wondering if staff can speak to the annual flood protection upgrades, and appreciate that we've identified a project that is grant eligible. But I do have concerns about reduction of scope. And was my understanding from the flood hazard mitigation that we're meant to be investing about $4 million a year. And it feels like we're reducing that quite substantially at this point. Can just staff speak to that and the potential risks that opens us up to?
Through the mayor, that may actually be a question for Mr. Russell. I'm aware that we are looking into this project, but I hadn't been aware that we would be cutting funding in a future year. So I think it makes good sense to continue on with roughly a $4 million expenditure per year.
So what I would add to that is In the next 2 years, 24 and 25, we've replaced the current flood protection plan with this project, because this project will take 2 years to complete. That's my understanding based on the information provided by our engineering group. That knowledge, and also the fact that we will have the ability to continue to work on design, etc., we think is appropriate. Really what it comes down to is we've used up the grant funding that we've allocated to those 2 years, because we have $4 million a year, $4 million of grant funding allocated to over those 2 years. So effectively, we've used up our grant funding allocation, and we put this project in as a placeholder on a matching basis. So we're attempting to match whatever grant funding we're able to get. So it doesn't prevent us from going out and looking for more grants. And if we were to get more grants, we could accelerate the projects from future years and bring them in. But at this stage, we've used up the grant funding that we had allocated. So we've taken those 2 years worth of projects out and offset them with this one instead.
But if another grant did come up, we aren't reducing the amount that we have in our budget to match any potential future grants. The intention has always been, or my understanding was that the 4 million was kind of broken up, 2 million taxation, 2 million grants. And that was kind of just like the baseline that we'd provide. As I see it here, we're reducing that from 8 million to 5.4.
Yes, because at this point, we don't have another grant identified. If we were to identify another grant, we would apply for that grant. And if, obviously, needless to say, if we were successful, we would adjust our financing accordingly. And that would occur within the next financial plan cycle for 2024. This project specifically is designed to replace the flood protection work that we were planning in 2024. It is, there's a small portion in 2023, but that's more around design.
Okay, I will wrap my head around that a little bit more. My other question on the capital is the cost escalation around the new pickleball courts, which feels substantial. And staff's recommendation to, I think it is to use additional CACs to cover that cost. I'm just wondering what other funding sources have been explored and what the driver is of that cost escalation.
I think that was a two-part question. So I think that James Story, our Director of Public Works, is available to address the cost aspect. And I think that the second portion that you were asking about was the funding aspect. We've looked at our overall CAC plan. At this stage, we have approximately $6 million in CACs today. We have, I think, about $4.5 to $5 million worth of CAC projects identified in our financial plan today. So all of the work that we currently had identified at the Recreation Center and elsewhere is funded from existing CACs, from the money that's currently in the bank. And then we will be building that up over time as we move forward. So we think that it's reasonable to use the existing values in CACs to pay for this rather than moving funding from one project to another. Moving funding from project to project does create risks, because if you want to increase the funding here by decreasing the funding in a different project, it creates risks based on whatever that other project is. But I'll let Mr. Story speak to that. We've had more money come in the last 2 years through CACs than we had anticipated. I won't call it a windfall. I'll call it more development revenue than we had forecast. So we're in a bit better place now than we were last year when we were projecting how much work we could do using CACs. We probably got an additional $1 million over the last 2 years in our CAC contributions. So we think that it's reasonable to use CACs to continue to pay for these types of projects.
Councillor Stone, are you okay? Or do you have a follow-up?
Just my other part of my two-part question in terms, what is the driving cost for the escalation? Yeah, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around spending almost $700,000 on pickleball courts.
Through the mayor. So last year when that original budget was put forward for the pickleball courts, it only contemplated what the cost of the mat and the court itself would cost. It did not contemplate a location. When we finally found a suitable location, the additional costs are due to having to do a site survey, an environmental review, significant tree clearing and ground improvements. And we also put funding in there to build a higher fence with sound attenuation matting on it in order to control the noise and make sure that we did not disturb any future existing residences or businesses. And so that is where the primary driver of the cost increase is.
You okay for now, Councillor Stoner? Yep. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, well, along a bit of a similar line, I understand, we found some funding options, but for me, that's one piece. The other piece is fairness to all the other user groups who are looking for more fields and facilities and so on. And I'm wondering how we have, or how we are reconciling that, because it does seem like a significant increase in funding and support for one activity. And I'm wondering if it is time to look at reducing scope. From where we started this process, the scope has massively increased, as well as the cost apparently. And so I'm feeling some discomfort in terms of fairness to the other user groups. I know we have the Fields master plan. I'm not clear on how that's played into, understanding these costs and the prioritization and so on. I'm just wondering if there's anyone that can speak to that.
I'll take a brief stab at it through the mayor. There is identified area in the Brennan Park Master Plan for these courts adjacent to the existing tennis courts at Brennan Park. So that was contemplated in the master plan. As for the rest of your question, it would probably be better answered by someone in recreation.
Through the chair, I can possibly answer that. Could you just repeat it one more time, Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I'm just sort of wondering how we are reconciling these cost escalations for one particular activity. We have many demands for fields and support for activities and so on. And so it's not just, from my perspective, not just a funding issue, it's a fairness, and just wondering how we are, again, reconciling this significant increase in focus on one activity as opposed to spreading it a little bit around, or sort of saying, hey, do we reduce the scope here? And if we have extra funding, maybe putting it into moving a couple of the other activities forward as well.
Certainly, and I believe Mr. Story spoke to how we got to this cost escalation. Does that come with that part of it? As far as the sort of the distribution of funds regarding other activities on Brennan Park Lands and Fields Master Plan site, this particular issue, as council was aware, was an emerging issue that came out last spring with a bit of a conflict regarding the tennis court users at Eagle Winds and the pickleball court that was established there. And we made a commitment to the community to relocate those courts and provide a bit of breathing space to do that. Both groups, I guess, had what we call this kind of a cooling off period to support the pickleball activity that became super popular during the pandemic and has continued to grow and relocate. But since then, as we've heard, the costs have gone up as we determined the new site. And we don't see any other competing priorities right now that we're taking away those dollars from. The plan itself is funded to the point where we can proceed on the events that are, or activities that are scheduled in the next 5 years. So it's not taking away from any other plan that's proceeding, if that answers the question. Does that help?
Did we not, I think I've seen some correspondence around cricket and so on. Have we put that into our plans for an example?
Yes, we are working with the Cricket Association and establishing a protocol on how to advance some of their plans into the Barron Park Lands and Fields Master Plan. That's correct. But there's been no funding requested this time.
Okay, I'll ponder that for a second. Thanks.
Thank you. I was wondering if someone online earlier in the conversation around the pickleball tennis court, part of the funding was to rehabilitate the pickleball downtown to revert it back to tennis. And I'm just wondering, as the cost escalation is happening here, if I believe we landed on that was funded and that was going to happen as part of this reconfiguration. But if deferring part of that to and maybe that seems like a part that wasn't going to be included initially, so perhaps that's just part that could be deferred to sort of help with the impact of this escalation. Could someone speak to those considerations as we're looking at providing this additional funding?
I can take that one through the chair. Yes, that was there was an additional 50,000 added to that budget to convert the Eagle Wind courts back to tennis. The rough cost estimates I received from the vendors is that cost would be roughly $80,000 to $90,000. So yeah, that is something that could be considered.
But that currently isn't in the plan. If it was in, I was contemplating how much it was and if it could be removed, but that's something that's not currently funded. I just don't quite recall where we landed there. I thought yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, through the chair. Yeah, I should have been more clear. Yes, that is part of the scope of this funding.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I bet Councillor Hamilton hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll go back to Stoner Pettingill.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I too am very concerned by this nearly $700,000 for one activity that a fraction of our community plays. How far into this expenditure are we? Meaning, how much have we spent already? And what is our if we were to change our minds? What would be the next steps to change our minds on this expenditure?
I'll take a stab at that one through the chair. Right now, we've spent approximately $50,000. We have the opportunity to change course at any time. There's nothing, we don't have commitments beyond that at this point. We have not issued any tenders. That was subject to this budget amendment. So everything is still somewhat negotiable. Having said that, the existing agreement between the Parkhouse Strata and Pickleball Squamish was that they would continue the existing arrangement of reduced hours at Eagle Wind until the end of August, with the hopes that we would have new pickleball courts in place by that time. So that is the only other external consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, then Pettingill.
Thank you. And further to that, how much work has started on the tennis court rehabilitations? And is there any connection with the additional 2 courts at Brennan Park? That's a $350,000 line item in the 2023 budget. I'm just wondering if the opportunity to use that budget. I appreciate that would have impact on not moving that work forward, but I guess my preference would be to use that budget line item as opposed to additional CAC funding.
Right. So through the chair, those are separate. We haven't initiated that work yet. That work is going to be tendered out for contract. We're hoping we can come in under that significantly, but we won't know until the tender is received. I would be very hesitant to recommend removing that. Those courts have deteriorated to the point where we have safety concerns with people tripping on them. They're in pretty rough shape, the southern two courts at Brennan, as well as Boulevard Court. And that's what this money was put forward in the budget to do, is fund the rehabilitation of those courts for safety issues and to maintain our assets. If we don't do that, we would probably have to consider closing those courts until repairs could be made. And there is no, these additional courts at Brennan were not contemplated as part of that 350. That was in the future years of the 5-year plan.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, can someone remind me how many pickleball courts there were at Eagle Wind versus how many are planned for Brennan Park with the current proposal?
Through the chair, there were 6 at Eagle Wind. We're planning for 6, possibly 8 at Brennan Park. But based on the survey, right now it looks like 6 will fit. There is possibly room to expand, but currently we're targeting 6.
Okay. Council will have a chance to question sort of the overall, so we'll keep moving through the presentation and put it back to you, Mr. Russell. Sorry if your microphone, please, Mr. Russell.
The other portion of the budget amendment relates to special operating projects. So I'm going to speak about these a little out of the order of what you see here. I'm going to talk about the ones towards the bottom first, and then we'll loop back. We received a grant from the provincial government to allow us to do some work and some studies with respect to circular economy. So we've included a project in there. This is being sponsored by Economic Development. The grant is approximately 3/4 of that overall value. And we're putting forward the remainder. The portion that's funded by the district reflects funds that are already in the economic development budget and in-kind contributions. So it's not costing us additional money. This is something we had contemplated and we're hoping for, and we were successful in landing the grant. The other 2 projects, airport lands projects, this was a miscommunication between departments, and they had submitted some paperwork that went missing, let's say, in the first budget cycle, and so were not included. They had requested these projects, and we simply didn't include them. The airport lands projects will be funded through the airport reserve, and therefore will have no direct tax impact. And lastly, the REFMP Real Estate Facilities Master Plan pre-development project. There are 3 components to this project. One relates to the Innovation Hub, which is being championed by economic development with the assistance of planning and real estate. A civic block municipal hall discussion, which again is being championed by the real estate department, and both of those would relate to use of external contractors or consultants, I guess would be the appropriate term. And then Brennan Park future facilities plans, which would be headed by our Director of Infrastructure and Construction, Cal Bragg. And we have some additional information with respect to that project that we can provide. And I'm hoping someone behind me who I can't see because I don't have a mirror is going to step up to speak to those components. Thank you, Mr. Plum.
Was hiding behind you there. Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. So, what we just want to walk you through here is we're on this. I'll speak to the civic block and a little bit to the innovation area, and I'll let perhaps Ms. Mulligan speak a little bit on the innovation area, and I'll let Mr. Bragg speak to the recreation facilities. But we're moving into a bit of a new realm now with the real estate and facilities master plan. And there's some pretty big decisions that are coming forward. The civic block is something that we've talked about in the RFMP. It includes municipal office space, libraries, community spaces. I apologize for the acronym of ACHS's, Arts, Cultural Heritage uses. And we've talked about co-locations in the civic block with people at the school district, other government agencies. The recreation facilities, obviously there's still some work to be done around the Brennan Park in terms of the pool, the rink, and the wellness center, and possibly how satellite locations might fit in with that. And we're also looking at the possibility, or we want to explore the possibility to create what we call an innovation area in the business park on our land there at lots 38, 39. So a lot of this work that we need to do to make these decisions come forward, and we want to get these hopefully embedded in the financial plan as soon as we can. It requires a different level of expertise than what we have in-house. We need to bring in and use planning folks, architects, engineering, significant consultants, and financial estimators to help us really drive these decisions to the finish line. And the goal is to get to a place where we can make a final decision on the municipal offices and know how that fits into a broader civic block. We want to be able to get to a point where we've got the scope and the funding and how we're going to move forward within the location of like the rinks and the pool and how that all fits. We could fit together at Brennan Park. And we want to be able to come forward and bring those decisions and move them forward in a meaningful way. So we want to bring these folks in, do the work so that we have great confidence in the decisions that we're making, and get that work done in order to hopefully bring that forward in the 2024 5-year financial plan budget process. And basically eliminate through this process any further work, analysis work, or thinking about these facilities. That we'll get them to a point where we're making decisions, we're making recommendations where they fit, and they won't have to be analyzed over and over again. And if we're able to move forward with this project as well, a lot of the work we're doing or we'll be doing in this process, it is development-oriented work. And so it's information that we can reuse as we actually move into implementing several of these projects in time as they get implemented. So, so that's sort of a high level, and I'll turn it back to council.
Thank you. Maybe we'll try to get through the whole, the three pieces on the side. I think we had Ms. Mulligan for the innovation area, and then we can answer questions around all of them, if that works for staff. I thought it was the next piece, but that's okay. We can do questions on this piece, and then we can go to if there's another piece. Just he had them grouped. Yeah. Or is there not another piece? Sorry, I thought there was I think you had three pieces there, and Mr. Plum's piece was one. And
sorry, I ended up kind of hitting the high notes on all of them.
Okay,
council has specific questions about them, then we can bring in Mr. Bragg and Ms. Mulligan. I wasn't sure whether there was another slide coming in the slide deck.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. I wasn't sure either. Okay, so council on this on these pieces, questions. No questions on these pieces? Okay. Oh, Councillor Storm.
Yeah, sorry, can you just reiterate the time sensitivity and the realistic nature of getting this done before, like, we start 2024 financial planning in a few months? And so what is just thinking of this as like a budget amendment, why would this not be considered in the 2024 budget as opposed to putting it in now?
Thank you for the question. Well, actually, the 2024 5-year financial plan is actually probably a mistake on our part. This is getting this organized for the 2024 session, and not this session coming with 23. This is to get ourselves in position to do the work in 2024, July of 2024, to bring these recommendations forward. So that work needs to happen over the course of this year because we don't have time this year to do this work prior to the July 2023 budget cycle for 2024. So what we're proposing is to start this work now. It'll get done over the balance of this year, and all the analysis will be done over the balance of this year to get ourselves ready to come to council in 2024 for the 5-year plan that follows that budget. So it's a bit of a labeling issue there.
I'll follow up on that. I think the question also is the urgency between like the actual time required to do this work. So do we need to have this in now to achieve that goal? Is that actually the length of work, length of time required to perform this work? Do we need that long a runway? And I think that's what you're looking to be sold on, Councillor Stoner. And I am anyways, and I think that's what you were getting at as well.
So you're correct. There's a fair chunk of work that needs to be done here. There's a lot of detail analysis that needs to be done, and situations like municipal offices, the locations haven't been picked yet. There's a lot of decisions on how to finally, it's in the financial plan right now as a placeholder for release, but there's a fair level of detail analysis still needs to happen there. And we're also working with the school district and figuring out how that can be coordinated. So that work is not work that we can complete in short order. It's going to take us the balance of this year to work through all of that. We also have to bring in a fair bit of detailed work on Brennan Park to make sure everything can fit there on the land and how it can coordinate with other facilities that are there. And likewise with the feasibility study for the innovation area, there's a fair bit of work to be done to figure out how that can move forward and whether it's even viable to bring that to fruition. So that work we do need the runway the runway to get this forward, to bring this forward in 2024. It's going to take us about 8 months to a year to bring that analysis to its conclusion. The sensitivity is when we said time sensitivity on the slide, what we want to do is be in a position to start bringing other projects into the back end of the 5-year plan. Currently right now, municipal offices is in the 5-year plan as a placeholder, but there's no other facilities in there right now in Brennan Park other than the work that's in there now for the sustainability type work. So the pool, the rink, and the wellness center, those are not in the 5-year plan. We want to be starting to get those into the 5-year plan. So by us bringing these folks in to help us get to a decision point in the next year, we can be in a position to start making recommendations for the 5-year plan. What we're learning is every year we delay on getting facilities advanced, costs seem to have gone up significantly. So we want to keep moving projects into the 5-year plan as much as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill, did I see your hand on this? No. Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks very much for all the work you do in putting these really complex projects and plans together. I'm concerned about the amount of money we're proposing to spend here on the planning for two major projects, potentially 3, without, in my mind, a clear pathway to push them all forward at the same time in a timely manner. I have significant concern that we're going to be spending half of this funding on plans that are going to go out of date because we weren't able to get the funding together in time. I think that it may be time for us to make a hard decision in one direction or another before spending that much money on architects and engineers on designing buildings. Thanks.
Any other go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, question to follow that comment. Is it the same people that we're hiring to do all 3 of these? Are there cost savings in doing all 3 at the same time, or is there a reason why we're advancing all 3 at the same time?
Thank you. So in terms of the doing them at the same time, yeah, what we learned in the real estate and facilities master plan is the decisions that we make around the civic block, especially around municipal offices, will have an impact on cash, land reserves, dip borrowing capacity. And that will impact other projects that weren't prioritized ahead of that, which is like the recreation facilities in the master plan. So the decisions we make around the civic block have an impact on the recreation facilities. The decisions we make on the recreation facilities could impact the decisions on how we move forward with the civic block. So we see them as they're connected. And so we feel that it would be very difficult for us to make final decisions on these projects, especially the civic block, which the municipal offices were prioritized ahead on, without looking at how the impacts are. And so we see them needing to be assessed at the same time. And if we feel that council will be in the best position to make a final decision on what to do with the municipal offices and how to bring the decisions in on things like Brennan Park into the financial plan, when they can see the whole picture and they can have an analysis that says, if we do this, it impacts over here. If we do this over here, it impacts over there. They're all connected. So we feel it's really important that we do them together at the same time so that you'll have the best information to make the decisions that you're going to have to make. There may be some possibilities to do some cost sharing. The civic block and the innovation area is very planning development or more oriented. The work that's to be proposed to be done at the recreation facility side of things is more nuts and bolts. It's more architects, designs, engineers. How do we put this on this piece of land? How do we make it fit? The decision-making on the civic block still is evaluating different locations, doing analysis around which is financially the best location from a planning perspective, which opportunities might exist in the civic block and how to organize that. So it's a different animal, but there may be some, but they are very distinct projects. It's just we want to bring them together at the same time.
So oh, Ms. Glenda, do you want, or where do you want me to go? Would you like to comment on this, or do you want me to flip?
Mr. Calbragg is on the line, and I believe he can speak in detail to the recreation or the Brennan Park work. That is approximately half of this amount, and I think that would help council as well with the information.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'll give some hard examples of where we're sitting, and Neil actually touched on a point, which is the nuts and bolts. And I think we need some clarity between feasibility work, whereas it's correct, it does go out of date compared to, say, pre-development work. And for us, pre-development work, is surveys, geotech, and all those bits and pieces. Some of the hard examples that we're working on at the moment is the splash park and playground, and where this fits in. So we've got the Lands and Field Master Plan, which is an overview. We're getting down to the details of literally choosing locations of where things can go. Where the splash park and playground goes, we need to look at where that sits in correlation to the future pool, where that's going to sit, and where it sits in correlation to the ice rink, and how it works with the mechanical rooms, and where we can get some economies of scale and capture opportunities. How do people move around the site, and then how do they interact with the main facility? So we need additional work here to make sure that what we do now, things are in the right spot, so we don't have to redo any work in the future. Another one, say civil engineering, where we're looking at the grant number one works, which is the stage one work. We're also with civil engineering, with the utilities and all the, for electrical and water and sewer and everything that's coming into the building, do we have enough for the actual future stages of the project itself? It's not ideal to hire a consultant just to do one corner of the work of the building when we've got so many more future stages coming in here. The other one's arts, culture, and heritage, and this is a specific example. So if we're going to create a gallery or makerspace in the facility, which is what we're aiming for, how does this get locked off after hours for recreation, for a very specific example? And then also parking. Do we want the wellness centre in a certain area, or is it going to be on site? Is it going to be off site? And how does any future parking, even right down to the electrical charging bays? So all this work that we're doing is involving geotech, is involving surveyors, is involving soil consultants, and getting in to do this work so we know what goes where for the future, because we've got one chance to do a really good design job on this community hub. And we need to do this work regardless. So from the nuts and bolts, that's where it's looking for from recreation.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any question? Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Pettingill.
So just so I'm understanding, though, the interaction between the three sub-projects is largely a financial one, unless I'm mistaken. Maybe I'll start there. That's the primary interaction between the three is the financial impacts of one on the other?
Through. You want to-
I'll answer that. They are tied together to a certain degree from a financial perspective. We are going to require additional funding for facilities as we move into the future. And we do need to have a better understanding of what our land assets are and how we can best utilize those land assets to generate funding as we move forward. And so part of the process of the innovation hub would be to understand better what lands we have there, how we could build an innovation hub, and what might be available for us to use for other purposes. And those other purposes would include financing future capital investments, whether those capital investments be specific facilities such as public works, or whether they will be future facilities such as recreation or civic block municipal hall. So from that standpoint, there is a financial aspect of all three of these together. We know that there's a lot of money that's going to be tied up in these three. I won't say the specifics of these three, but once you start looking at what the results of these three initiatives are going to generate, probably looking at, north of $150 million, right? So yes, there definitely is a significant financial component to what we're undertaking here. We want to know what it is that we need to build. We want to know how much it's going to cost, so that we can try to figure out how we would be able to go about doing that, how we could best finance such a plan. And if we don't know what all the various components are, it would be very difficult for us to create a plan that goes 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future that allows us to adequately and sustainably manage these various projects. We need to know what it is that we need to build, and we need to have a pretty good idea what it's going to cost to do so. And then we can try to figure out how we would go about paying for all that. So yeah, definite financial lens involved.
Go ahead, Mr. Plum.
Through, if I just may add to that, just to kind of reiterate what I said earlier, when we did the real estate and facilities master plan, we ran through several funding illustrations. They're in the back of the analysis and didn't always get read by everybody, but the reality was what we learned through that process was that we can't, unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can make any real decision, any significant decisions when we get to this level of the project, of the implementation of the master plan in isolation. What we do, every decision we make now has impacts on other facilities. That was part of the reasons why we did the prioritization that we did. We recognized that there were certain facilities up front, like the fire halls and the public works, that absolutely had to go get through and get rebuilt and replaced. And the decision-making around those was very linear, one after another. This now we're getting into a realm where the decisions that we're making for all of these situations all impact each other. And so to put you folks in the best place to make these decisions that are coming up that need to be made in the next couple of years in the five-year financial plan, we want to be able to show you clearly the impacts of making a decision around the civic block and what it means for Brennan Park or the rec facilities or vice versa, because there will be impacts depending on which paths we follow. And we want to be able to clearly articulate how what decision over here impacts over there, so that when you're making that decision, you understand, and we can also maybe explain to the community clearly as well when those decisions are being made, what the impacts could be. So they are intrinsically tied together from a financial perspective as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? And Councillor Stoner has left, but she's called in. So as she's got some council-related travel on the go, I just wanted to check with Councillor Stoner that we can that it's working and you can hear us and we can hear you before we
Hi
go much
there,
further.
I can hear you.
Great. Okay, thank you. I trust you'll get my attention when it's needed, and I'll put you on the speakers list. Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, so following up on that, and I guess that aligns with my understanding, but it does seem like from what we've heard, the rec and facilities piece of this is at a more granular level of detail. And so I guess in my possibly naive mind, sort of order of magnitude of a rink versus a pool and so on is what we need to kind of think about, contemplate the financial impacts between these three projects. And then the more granular detail about where does a specific, piece of infrastructure on Brennan Park lands go is a more granular level of detail, which, is maybe more detail than we need to move the other two pieces forward, unless I'm misunderstanding something. And I guess, I understand too, the community is very eager to see more things sooner at Brennan Park. But I'm, thinking about our capacity to actually move things forward. And so I wonder if we sort of proceed with Brennan Park at the more macro level of order of magnitude of a rink, pool and how that interacts, or do we need to go to this more specific detail this year?
So I could perhaps let Mr. Bragg answer that in a second, but in terms of the other things like the civic block, we need to get into a fairly granular level as well. The sites are a bit smaller, but for just making decisions on municipal offices, for example, we need to understand clearly what the development potential of this property is. So we will be working with similar people. We won't be getting right down to the exact same level we might be getting at Brennan Park because we have to figure out things together, but we will also be doing a very detailed analysis on that as well. So there's a fair level of detail to get into on all fronts to get to the decision point. And I don't know if Cal, if you want to add adding to that.
Yeah, through the chair, I think I'm going to try and answer this simply. If we just focus on one part of Brennan Park, we've got the grant number 1 renovation work going on right now. And if successful, we've got the next grant coming up as well in the next few months. And if we don't design and allow for these properly, we're going to have add-ons because we're trying to retrofit an existing building. And if we don't think about certain areas, it's not going to be the product that it can be. And staff are concerned that we're just renovating one little corner, but there's also other areas that have been left on the sidelines. So this is part of all bringing it all together and creating a real recreation centre that works functionally.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hamilton.
So I'm going to come back to the piece I'm struggling with, and maybe I'll try to ask the question more directly. Do you see any path forward within the 5-year plan that both of these projects can be moved forward? Both, and when I say both, I mean the Civic Hall and Brennan Park renovations. Is there, you said it's $150 million is what we're talking about. Do we see any plan to potentially be able to have and spend that money?
We don't have that plan right now, but this work is going to get us there. That's why we want to do this work, is to be able to lay that plan out. We don't have that plan right now because we still have, sorry, go ahead if you wanted to chime in.
Sorry, I mean the plan to have the money. I don't understand where the money's coming from.
Okay. Sorry. So in terms of what we've learned through this process as well is that to move forward the civic block parts like the library, the community space, the Brennan Park project, the pool, the ice rink and wellness center, we don't have the cash and the borrowing capacity today to move all those projects forward. What we learned in the master plan was that we will need a significant amount of external funding, whether that comes from sponsorships, external grants, partnerships with other entities like SLRD or potentially private operators. We have to pull all of that together to move everything forward. So one of the reasons why we want to do this work is by finalizing, hopefully once and for all, what the scope and of these facilities are going to look like, especially at Brennan Park. It allows us to go out and start looking towards fundraising as well externally and figuring out, but it's hard to go externally to look for money when you don't have a project. So a lot of the work we're talking about doing around the rec facilities is finalizing scope and working with end users and stakeholders to kind of get to that place where we have a scope designed so we can go out and see what kind of external funding is out there. But as it sits today, no, we do not have enough financial capacity to move all of these projects into the financial plan right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I think I'm still just struggling as to why this is landing in the spring amendment. So I think one of the things that we did in terms of trying to move the budget forward was to try and be cognizant about not putting too much into the spring amendment and not just it being an opportunity to reopen the budget. And I'm having a hard time contextualizing this amongst other requests that may come forward and the timing of it. So I guess my question is back to like the urgency factor and why this is coming in the spring amendment and not as part of the 24 budget consideration.
I'll start. Thanks. Yeah, so it didn't make it into the last year's budget because we hadn't connected all these dots at this point in time, like a year ago, last July. This is a scenario that emerged since then. And then we started to realize that this was emerging here and that this is how we needed to move this forward. And the reason we didn't want to bring it forward in the next budget cycle is it wouldn't allow us to do this work this year. And so we don't have any budget to move this analysis forward in 23. So we want to move this analysis forward in 23 so that we can come into 2024's, July of 2024's budget process and make recommendations. There's not enough time in 2024, in our opinion, to do all this analysis and get it ready for the July 2024 summer budget session.
If I could add to that through the chair. We have a long-term a long-term financial model that we are using. We've been working with a consultant to update that model, and we're in coordination with our new budget model that we've just implemented. We hope to be creating a draft in 2024 for use this year, this summer, of that longer term model. But the longer plan is to use that 10 to 15 to 20 year model to incorporate all of our existing financial plan capital projects and financial plan capital projects that are over the horizon. So those that are between years, say 6 and 10, 10 to 15 within this model. That is the model that we will be using to address some of the concerns that, for example, Councillor Hamilton brought up with how are we going to pay for all this? We have a model to plug all this information into. If we do this process today, we will have the results from what all these various projects cost in a timely enough manner to put those into our long-term model and bring that back to you as part of the 2025 process and in 2024 as part of the 2025 financial planning process. That's from a financing and long-term modeling perspective. That's the other reason we would like to see this project go forward today. We don't think that we would be able to get this information and incorporate it into a model that would allow us to see what all the moving pieces look like and what the options would be for financing this and be able to bring it to you next year in a timely manner if the work were not to take place now or shortly. So we have some concerns about that, be able to tie those two together.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stoner, do you have a follow-up? Your hand is still raised.
Oh no, let me lower my hand. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. No, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks. And I guess I'm trying to realize what some of my reservations are, what some of my underlying reservations are about this plan. And I think that part of it is that I've I've lost quite a lot of confidence in our ability, and not just our ability, in the ability, humanity's, not the district's ability, to forecast costs. We've seen extraordinary cost escalations on very short timescales. So I'm struggling to see the value of figuring out where the electric car chargers go at Brennan Park in order for us to cost that out when we don't have a way to pay for it. So that those cost estimates, I can't see how they're valuable when they're coming so far ahead of the expenditure.
Ms. Glende?
Thank you for that. And in order to, like, an example I can give is grant opportunities come up for Brennan Park as an example. And we can't go after them because we don't have a plan or a project for them. I can appreciate the uncertainty of forecasting costs, and that's just a reality that we're in. We find ourselves at this crux right now because we are decades behind looking after our facilities. And the fear that we have as staff is, Brennan Park is woefully under servicing our community now. Municipal Hall, we've run out of space for staff in the offices. If the roof goes, we don't have an option. Like, we are getting close to that place. Without a solid plan, the next step of how do we fund it, what grants, what are our options, we cannot move this facility plan forward. And I do appreciate that $820,000 is in and of itself a large piece of money, chunk of cash, for lack of a better expression. It doesn't affect taxation this year. We have found funding for it relative to the investment that the district has to do in our facilities master plan to deliver on those core facilities. It's actually a reasonable amount of money against that magnitude of project. I do appreciate it. It's difficult to wrap our heads around, but a courageous decision to plan is what allows us to deliver in the future. And there's never a good time to spend money on a plan, but we'll never be able to deliver if we don't plan. And that's why this is before you today.
Thank you for that context. Okay. Mr. Plum? Microphone, please.
Sorry, I'm always reluctant to follow after the CAO after a commentary, but I think the thing to keep in mind is the actual cost estimating component of this work is a relatively small percentage of the overall work that we're doing here. We're bringing in the design work and the architectural work, and all that work likely will still be usable as we move into the future. The actual cost components of it is a relatively small percentage of the overall budget that we're looking at. And that if it requires the cost components need to be updated at a later date, those can be updated at a pretty nominal amount. The bulk of the money is being spent on creating the framework for the decision, the consideration points of the decision, and how the decisions are going to be laid out and how they impact each other at this point in time. And so I just wanted to bring that last layer into that. I appreciate what you're saying here in terms of the cost side of it, but it isn't the bulk. I'm not sure, Cal, if you can express how much from the Brennan Park perspective you've put into that equation for cost consultants, but it's fairly nominal in the grand scheme of things, is it not?
Through the chair, it was $400,000 in total, with $75,000 contingency.
But how much of that 400,000 is actual cost estimating?
15,000.
Mr. Pagely, I saw your hand up earlier. Was that, have your comments been addressed, or would you like to add something to this?
I appreciate CEO Glende just bringing a summary to the overall perspective. The only thing I wanted to add was just the piece around the granular planning on the Brennan Park site. Mr. Bragg spoke to some specific items And think the question was very important to kind of follow up on that. Do we need to get down to that level at this point? And can we wait? The reality is the field's components that we're trying to build out all interconnect to the actual hub of the Brennan Park site. So the mechanical components, electrical, etc. We're trying to create efficiencies right now and laying those out so that as we build up the land side of it, and they're already starting to come into the 5-year budget cycle right now, we're actually doing them in proper order and effective use of our consultants and infrastructure investments. So that's why we have to get to some of those detail levels. Maybe Mr. Bragg, you might want to add something if I missed.
Nothing to add, Mr. Paisley.
Okay, thank you. Council, we are, this is an important part of the overall, but we are looking to make some progress on to consider readings for the amendment. So we're running a little behind time. So if we could move to that portion, that's where we need to be. Go ahead, Councilor Pettingill. Yeah, you'll be on the list after Councilor Pettingill. Councilor Stoner.
So I just want to check because it's been mentioned. So my maybe misunderstanding had been a few things like splash pad were moving forward in the near term. What I'm sort of hearing is that we need to get some of this planning work done in terms of where the pumps go and all of that to make that happen. I'm just wondering, are those pieces actually moving forward, and then this work will just plan the remainder around it, and we're going to make some very short-term decisions, or are we sort of taking a step back and saying, no, we actually do need to sort of plan out the whole site, and so this, $400,000 for Brennan Park in particular, that does have to happen first in the near term, and then we can start moving on some of these smaller aspects of Brennan Park.
Through the chair, looking backwards in this, we don't want to put the pool in the wrong spot. If we find in the future that we could have put it in a different spot that worked better for people movement, that's more economical, that fits with, economies of scale by having a central walkway and better common space and just better design, we need to plan that now. We can't piecemeal the plan of a whole area. You need to look at it from an overview. So the things need to be located in their right location as we move forward now.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I just want to go back to the question of the pickleball courts. And I heard that part of the cost for the new location is a sound attenuation wall, which was something that we had talked about a little bit at the current location. And I'm just wondering if that might be a more reasonable solution, as we just put in a sound attenuation wall at the Eagle Wind courts as opposed to relocating them, and if that's been considered as part of the context of the cost escalation.
From my recollection, the sound attenuation at the current site wasn't going to be effective given the proximity and the height of the buildings adjacent. But I'm curious I will get a staff comment on that as well. If someone's online could comment on that.
If Mr. Story can speak to it, or if not, James, are you there? I can follow up.
I think Mr. Bragg, I saw a hand in the air.
James.
Whoever would like it, go ahead over to staff.
Could you repeat that question just for me? I was having technical difficulties.
Yeah, no problem. It was just asking about the concept of putting a sound attenuation wall at the current Eagle Wind pickleball court location as an effort to try and mitigate the cost escalation. So as opposed to relocating.
We could do some investigative work on that through the chair. Yes. The issue is the proximity of the strata to the courts, and the height of the wall would have to be in order to actually block the sound effectively. It may not be realistic to do that.
Thank you. Was there another additional response? Mr. Pagely, was that your hand?
The chair, just to actually reinforce, Mayor, you're correct. In the sound engineer identified that just because the height of and the proximity of the building that's close to the courts, it's virtually impossible to really have any positive impact on decibels that would be reduced by any kind of sound engineering that we put in there.
Thank you for that context. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just I ride by there frequently, and where I see, I believe, the court's going, the highway noise is significant, and so I wonder if we actually need sound attenuation, or if it's, no attenuation be drowned out by the highway anyway. So, I guess, have we done measurements, or what's driving? Is it more sort of we've been burned once about sound and we're being extra cautious, or do we know we actually really need to attenuate sound in the Brennan Park location?
So to the chair, yeah, good question, Councillor Pettingill. We haven't done detailed sound studies, but we did recognize that the sound of the highway is significant, and that was part of the contributing reason for selecting that site, as well as it is on a truck route. But yes, primarily the concern is we don't want a repeat of Eagle Wind, and the sound of the pickleball play is quite high pitched and does travel. It is somewhat erring on the side of caution, but yes, you would be correct.
Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
So I'm wondering, because I saw some people playing pickleball on the tennis courts, and I had the ability to A/B that to the highway, and I guess it didn't strike me as there needed to be attenuation there. I wonder if that is something that needs to be done from day one, or could we do sort of the courts and the sound attenuation could be a future year and a future budget?
Through the chair, yes, it could be deferred. The actual cost of the matting itself was estimated to be around 55,000. The cost of the fencing could be reduced if it was not quite as high, if we put in a 6-foot fence instead of a 10-foot fence. But then we would have to rebuild that if we did need the sound attenuation. So it would result in maybe a $50,000 savings.
Thank you. I'll offer my comments on this piece. I've visited a few pickleball courts, and the noise associated with them is something that's becoming evident if as the sport grows, and it's not just from the adjacent residents where there will be residents adjacent to this, but it's also from the other user groups. So even some quite isolated pickleball courts that are generally put in close to tennis courts have the sound attenuation for the tennis users as well. And we have seen some correspondence that's at least got through to me. I believe it went through to council around pickleball noise from tennis court users. So I think that given the costs associated with that particular aspect of this, I think it's worthwhile. And I will lament the cost escalation here, and the original pitch to us from a budget perspective didn't contemplate some site specific or site prep, which these things do need to happen to achieve the goals. So I struggle with how that was, seeing the escalation overall, but these pieces that seem to be moving towards considering removing, I don't think are worthwhile ventures and will actually really negatively impact the outcome here without seeing this piece all the way through. And similarly with potentially deferring the sort of returning the Eagle Winds court to tennis, I think it's important to kind of get this all the way done. And but it is, I do struggle with that overall escalation. I believe that could have been avoided with a more realistic number from the onset. But here we are, and this, I think, leads into the other point with appropriate planning is really important, so we don't find ourselves in these positions like, oh, we missed this very important piece, and now we're seeing a cost escalation that we could have avoided through some more detailed investigating and planning ahead of the time. So that's the other piece of the real estate facilities master plan planning piece. I think if we want to get to the point where we are shovel ready, I think this is the best action to get us shovel ready on these projects sooner, so then we can set about tackling the big issue of how we actually execute these from a funding perspective piece, and right down to the nuts and bolts where that's the applicable level to be looking. So these two pieces I found quite challenging, but I do think that they're reasonable to take on it at this point. So that's where I am on both of the parts of this that seem to have been contentious for the group. And I'm open to hearing other points of view, but we are also we're over 30 minutes behind on our discussion, and we're trying to move towards 3 readings of this amendment. So I've enjoyed the conversation, but we need to drive towards somewhere that a decision on this. Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
I'm not sure if it's not a point of order, but it's a question of procedure. When we, is there a mechanism to have the pickleball, the 2 points that have come up in discussion, the pickleball courts, and the pre-development funding? Those, like, we either approve this, the budget amendment, the 5-year financial plan amendment as it sits, or we don't, or is there an option to change it at this moment?
We could, from my understanding, I'll take a stab at answering your question, and I'll check with our corporate officer to make sure that we're on side. We could parse out pieces to be excluded from this, but if we wanted to include them again, it would be in next year's finance. And I think that a lot of the comments we've had is on why it's important to be included now and not be a standalone amendment in future, which is a duplication of work and so on. So if now it's at the will of council, but there's been a pretty solid rationale, I believe, provided for the reason that we're dealing with these at this point. So is someone willing to put something forward here to? I will move then that that we give first 3 readings to the 5-year financial plan amendments. I'll speak to it if it's second.
Chair.
Council. Sorry, we just had Councillor Stoner. I have Councillor Anderson just seconded. Were you moving to second, or were you looking to make another recommendation?
I was just going to provide some further context to Councillor Hamilton's question, but I will withhold my comment.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll speak to this briefly. We've discussed the various pieces of this at length during this meeting, and I did just make some comments around the importance of the 2 more contentious pieces of this. I really think that if as a council we would like to advance the real estate and facilities master plan in a meaningful way, I do think that the pre-development funding is crucial. We've heard that from staff saying that if we want to actually make an impact on that, this is the way forward. Funding is one of the pieces we need to solve, and shovel-ready projects are the most fundable projects. So this moves us as fast as possible towards being shovel-ready. And even at this accelerated pace that this will allow us to achieve, it's going to take time. And I think there's community expectation that there'd be something in place, maybe 10 years ago. So I think it's important that we follow through on that expectation and put our community in a position where we can actually realize these facility replacements. And it is going to be challenging from a funding perspective. Absolutely. Also to the pickleball piece, I think this is a sport that's growing in our community. It comes with all sorts of health benefits, and people seem to really enjoy it. I haven't had a chance to play yet, but it does have. It's become evident that it has a sound impact, and where it is currently is not working. We've We've made agreements with with all the parties at that current site. We've made a commitment to move it. It's costing us more. That's not a massive surprise. Things are costing more, but I do think that we want to make sure that we execute this, and it's the last time we need to touch this particular pickleball court. And going forward, we're just looking at maybe adding facilities down the line, incorporating all the lessons learned. I think if we don't learn those lessons and apply them, then it's all for naught. So I'm happy to support, and thank you to staff across the organization for bringing all this forward, and for council's discussion today. I think as much as I'm concerned that we did go over time, I think it was time well spent flushing out all these pieces to make sure we really understood them. And I have Councillor French has his hand up, and then if anyone else wants to offer comments.
Thanks, Mayor. And this conversation has me thinking back to the previous term when council was contemplating committing to the construction of Fire Hall number 1. At that time, it felt like a big commitment and a bold move. And at that time, it was. And then thinking back, comparing then to now, this conversation to that conversation, Fire Hall number 1 and the decision and the commitment around that feels almost inconsequential. And, our community is screaming for indoor recreation improvements. And we need to move forward. And I think that what staff has put in front of us is the appropriate direction. And the staff justification that I've heard today, it satisfies me. So I'm speaking in favor of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor French. Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, I'd like to propose an amendment and move that we remove the additional pickleball funding and pause the project for the time being. If it's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Councillor Hamilton seconds. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you through the chair. If once this motion is voted on, I will speak more broadly to the budget amendment, but this is the one piece of the budget amendment that is significantly concerning to me with the cost escalations. I appreciate that we are trying to rectify a scenario that is not ideal, but the cost escalation, spending $700,000 on this one user group, although I recognize the value, the growing importance of it in our community, we've asked every other single user group to come to the table with at least some level of matching funding. And I don't think it's fair or equitable that we're spending another $300,000 almost to address this, in addition to the $350,000 that we're putting into tennis courts. So I don't feel comfortable moving forward with this. I appreciate that it would leave us in limbo for an additional season, but I think we need to do our due diligence and ask the pickleball community to come forward and do some fundraising or figure out what other grants might be out there to help support the growth of this particular recreation and sport in our community, as we've done with other user groups.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak on the amendments? Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I'm still, given the conversation, I've sort of gone back and forth throughout the afternoon. I think, and we're talking about $290,000 cost escalation. But that's the most recent one. I mean, thinking about where this conversation started, we are many, many, many times over the original estimate of what this was going to cost our community. And that is a big concern in terms of fairness to others. I mean, my recollection is that cricket folks could use a little bit of funds, but I am heartened to hear that all those things are in the shorter term plan, which has given me some pause, and also understanding that for a number of reasons, there is a situation we are trying to rectify, and I don't want to do something that causes that to fall apart. But I'm really torn here in terms of the fairness to other user groups. And I wonder, you know, even something like sound attenuation, even if that piece comes off, while it's not $290,000, you know, that $50,000 is a significant amount of money to some of our other user groups. And so, yeah, I guess I'm still really torn here.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. Councillor French?
Thanks, Mayor Herford. I won't be supporting this amendment. We council erred in allowing the pickleball courts to be built where they were at Eagle Wind, and that was unfortunate and it was regrettable. And I don't wish for us now to abandon the pickleball folks. If we pull the pin, delay this Brennan Park project for pickleball courts, it likely means there's going to be extremely limited pickleball options in the short term. So I think that we need to carry on, support the staff plan for moving forward with pickleball.
Thank you, Councillor French. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, I will also not be supporting the amendment. Pickleball is of particular importance to seniors in our community and will be probably to a greater extent in future. It's the nature of that sport. And I think looking at the landscape of our recreational opportunities and facilities, and they're quite diverse as far as who owns the land and what clubs there are and how much we spend in there. It's not a simple picture. And I don't think that the other use groups and other age groups are hard done by here relative to what we are investing in that may end up being important to seniors. So I'm happy with where we are right now. I'll just add that with respect to reconciling between different user groups, different age groups, and fairness in allocating resources to one recreational activity over another, it again speaks to the need for an updated Parks and Recreation Master Plan. That is one planning exercise that we haven't mentioned in this afternoon's conversation, but I would just speaking generally to the importance of our doing this planning to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't be supporting the amendment. Not only have we made a commitment to this to the user group, we've made a commitment to the neighbors of the current facility. I think that this is. I agree the cost escalation is incredibly challenging. The concept of a user group coming to the table with some fundings, I agree that that's a concept that we should really be looking for. And when folks do that, we can move to support them. I think in this case, if we delay for a year, we'll be lucky if the group comes together with the cost escalation we incur in that year. We've already seen substantial increases. So as painful as it is, I think we need to push on with this and get a solution in place that we've already committed to the user group and the community at large that we're gonna get done. So I think now is we're on the precipice of this, and this is the time, and it's only going to get more expensive as we go forward. Any other comments on the amendment before I've got Councillor Stoner, your hand's still up. I'd welcome another comment if you have it, or if.
No, I just lowered it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment? Councillor Pettingill, and opposed, if any. So Councillor French, Anderson, and Mayor Herford oppose. Motion carries. Okay, so now we're back to the original motion as amended. Any other conversation on didn't we have No, 4, 3 opposed.
French Anderson and Mayor Herford opposed. Okay.
Carries.
Okay. So the
Amendment carries. Thank you for the double check. I always appreciate that, but that, okay. So as amended, any more comments as amended before we call the question on first 3 readings? Yep. Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton. I heard you, Councillor Stoner. I'll come to you after Councillor Hamilton.
I'm and maybe it's my lack of experience. Maybe I should be putting forward a motion here. I don't think I completely agree that we should be planning and we need to be planning. But I think that we need to make a decision on what we plan before we go forward with all the plans. I don't see how we can go down all the roads at once. So I think that we need to be more conservative instead of putting money down into plans that I don't understand how they can come to fruition in a reasonable time frame. So I won't be supporting the first 3 readings of the 5-year financial plan amendment solely on that one component of that amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. I will support the spring amendment with the amendment that we just passed. Thanks to my colleagues for their support. I think that the discussion that we had today about the pre-development work that needs to be done was an important discussion to be had to better understand the work that needs to be done so that our ducks are in a row. We know how valuable it was to do the work under the real estate and facilities master plan to get our community and our district and our council into understanding what the deficit was in investing in our infrastructure and our facilities. And I see this as just the next iteration now that we've kind of gotten our critical facilities underway to really better understand what the next moves are going to be able to achieve those core facilities. And it is a fair amount of money to put down, but I think it'll be money that'll be well spent in the long term so that we can be as prepared as possible for grants that come up, as well as so that we can better understand around the council table how we want to prioritize applying the limited funding that we do have in our budgets in our 5-year, 10-year financial plan, hopefully going forward. So I am supportive of that portion of the budget, and I think the other cost escalations are a reality of where we are today. And I think staff have done a great job of trying to figure out how we can shuffle some of the projects either through grant funding or shuffle some reserves around so that it has limited tax implications. I did notice on the spring budget amendment that our non-market growth change was larger than expected, and so the actual tax implication to residents will be lower than what we had previously expected. So I am comfortable with where we have landed. And just to further on the pickleball component, I think that this is really just a pause. I appreciate that we have made a commitment to the strata, that we have made a commitment with the pickleball players. And I think that it will require ongoing dialogue to find a more reasonable solution. And hopefully there was expectation that there would be play through this summer at those courts while we built these new courts. And maybe there is an opportunity to find some quick creative grants to help fund some of that. But I just wasn't able to support that level of cost escalation at this point. So happy that my colleagues supported that motion, and I will be supporting the motion on the floor as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I will be supporting this as well. I think I think what we have seen in this amendment is there's a lot of cost escalations. We've heard a lot of demands from the community. I think I certainly am struggling to wrap my head around the desire and demand for things versus our ability to pay for them. And I think really that's at the root of some of our challenges here. I do see some of this work as critical to move some of these projects forward. I think there are things that we have talked about, especially at Brenham Park, about moving forward in the fairly near term. And so if this is what's required to make sure some of those things happen sooner rather than later, and I'm thinking about the splash pad in particular, it's the one that just jumps into my mind. I want to be in a position soon. We talked about using our CAC funds for those and being able to get those in the community when we see heat domes and these things happening. I think that sort of, I've become convinced some of these pieces of infrastructure are really important. So I think it is important to see us move some of these things forward and to make sure that we have done the due diligence and done the good planning to make sure we can actually be successful in moving these forward. So yeah, it's and actually I want to acknowledge that despite these amendments, we have seen the total tax requirement come down, and thanks largely to non-market growth. And I may have a comment about that, or even a resolution possibly in the next discussion. But I think all things considered, staff has done, I think, an excellent job at figuring out how all these demands come into our financial plan in a reasonable way. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Councillor Hamilton opposes. Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Just a clarifying question. My understanding of the pickleball resolution was that we pulled out the escalation, but the existing budget that we had put in is still there. And so in theory, there's opportunity to find solutions with that original budget envelope we had approved. Is that accurate?
I'll look to staff for those finer points.
What was the mover's intention?
Well, what was the mover? I suppose what was the phrasing of the motion? It's an excellent point.
My intention was just to remove the cost escalation.
Okay, that was the intent. We'll ensure that the motion reflect. We'll quadruple check that the that the motion reflects that. So that was, so you're correct, Councillor Pettingill. Okay, Council, we're nearing an hour behind schedule. I'm going to need to look to staff to see what we do with this topic that we did have an hour scheduled for, but we've got 10 minutes before our shortened dinner break to go into our evening meeting. So any thoughts on how we should do that? Is it worth starting? Do we defer this to some future time? We try to pick up the pace in our regular and put it at the end of that?
If I might, I wouldn't recommend starting now because it's definitely a topic that needs time to process because it's around tax rates and it's reminding folks about how that works, informing folks that have never dealt with it before. It does need the hour. I wouldn't say that starting now is a good idea. I would recommend doing it at the end of tonight only because there is no more room next week and this has to get done before tax time. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we'll recess at this. We'll recess until, and we will resume this meeting following the regular. So council back here at 6 for the regular, and we'll do this tax rate workshop presentation following the regular meeting. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to the continuation of the special business meeting. And we are on to item 5.1, which is the tax rate workshop presentation. I'll turn it over to staff to introduce themselves on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Herford, Council, and members of the community who have joined us this evening. My name is Heather Boxtrud, General Manager of Financial Services, and my pronouns are she, her, so I can be addressed accordingly. So I am joined here this evening by with Roland Russell, Senior Financial Analyst, who will be walking you through the mechanics of the tax rates workshop. The annual tax rate establishment has two parts. First, to establish the tax revenue requirement, which is determined through the financial planning process, and was third reading on the amendment this afternoon. Second, to determine how much each property class should contribute to paying for this tax revenue requirement by setting the respective tax ratios, which is what we are doing this evening. The tax bylaw is therefore the final step in the financial planning process, and Mr. Russell will walk you through the nuts and bolts of this in his presentation. So a few things to note: the tax revenue requirement for the 2023 fiscal that was established by the 2023 to 2027 financial plan provided for an 8.9 increase, or 37.2 million in required tax revenue. At the time, the non-market change or growth was estimated to be at 3%. However, BC Assessments has since confirmed that the non-market change was significantly higher at 4.78%. What this means is that there are more properties that will contribute to the tax revenue requirement than initially anticipated, or in other words, that there is a less burden on the existing taxpayer to contribute to the tax revenue requirement. This results in a 4.16% increase in the tax revenue requirement for existing property owners, as opposed to the 5.9 that was anticipated earlier in the year. BC Assessments tax roll is determined July of the previous year, so much can change in that time period, so that's something to note. And then finally, to note, property owners can appeal their property assessment value to BC Assessments. This is not a power provided to municipalities in BC. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Russell to work you. This one. Share too.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, members of the public. My name is Roland Russell, as so kindly introduced, and I'm going to walk you through the property tax bylaw presentation this evening. So we're going to start a bit of a discussion on how tax assessment impacts property tax. So we will also touch on council's options in setting property tax rates and relate to both step 1 and step 2 in this process. So in front of you is kind of like the mathematics of property tax. Just wish the rest of mathematics was this simple, but here we go. So assessed value, which is set by BC Assessment. Property tax, which is set by council. And you multiply those two together and you get a property tax amount assessed by property against an individual property. What should be pointed out that's of particular interest here, as Ms. Boxrud alluded to, the assessed values are determined independently of the municipality. There is a process which one would need to follow if they wish to challenge their assessment, and that is through BC Assessment. There's a period at the beginning of the year where one can file a claim against their assessment. Those are reviewed. When we get what is termed the revised roll from BC Assessment, it's viewed as revised because they have gone through their cursory review of the property, the assessment challenges, and most of the ones that can be dealt with quickly have been dealt with and have been adjusted. And so that's why they use the term revised roll to reflect the fact that it has been revised for adjustments in property assessment. Subsequent to that, there is the whole property tax rate setting piece, which is done by council in the spring, such as now. And well, and because we are the taxing authority. So I'm going to continue on from there. I think that we've covered that piece off and relate this slide. So it speaks to how changes in assessment impact an individual's property. So there's a number of different types of changes in assessment, but primarily one of three things can happen. Your property value, the change in your property value is less than the average change in your property class. The impact for you would be that you would pay less. Sorry. Your taxes are likely to decrease. Can't say exactly because it is a mathematical formula, but if there are other variables, we're speaking in general terms. If the average increase in assessment is comparable or similar to the change in the increase in your property tax, then it's likely that the amount of tax that you're going to pay this year is going to be comparable to the amount of tax you paid in previous years. Likewise, if your assessed value went up by more than the average, then it is likely that your taxes will increase in the coming year. Without delving into individual assessments against specific properties, it does become a little bit of a challenge to determine what impact it would have on you specifically, but these are the generic options that are available. So with that, I want to point out this slide. And on this slide, you will see a reconciliation of our tax revenue requirements for the year. So it's starting out with the value of taxes in 2022 at 34.2 million. And it's working its way through. Changes to existing service levels, increases the impact of service level changes, the impact of the net difference in special project funding from taxation year to year. It gives us a total of just over $3 million. We add that on, we come to a new balance of $37.2 million. And that total increase is going to be recovered from two varying components. One is non-market change. As Ms. Boxroot had mentioned, non-market change refers to increases in development or assessed property value for new. And these are people that hadn't paid, or properties that hadn't paid taxes previously. And so they're going to contribute $1.6 million of that $3 million total. And that would leave an increase of 1.4 million for the existing properties. If you break up that roughly 9% into percentages, it works out to 4.8 and 4.15. Okay. Now down to the piece that might be considered a little more interesting for this evening's discussion, tax rates and ratios and distribution. What we're showing here is the overall assessment by property class. We're showing the tax rate for the individual property classes and also the overall revenue received based on that tax. Should be noted that the main lever that council has at this point, they have two levers. So one is to adjust that 37.2 million in the lower right. That number was set when you set the financial plan. And we gave 3 readings this afternoon to an amendment to the financial plan. And that $3.7 million figure for revenue requirements is the same value that was approved in December. And we were not proposing any changes this afternoon. The other options would be to change the tax ratios. And so that's where we're going to move to next. And I'll speak about that briefly. So we're going to outline what our policies are and how they impact these values. So the district's tax policy, as it states here, is maintain a competitive rate for Class 5 light industry and to maintain a business class multiplier that encourages new business investment in the district. There's no specific value associated with the business class multiplier. It has been at 2.57 times the residential rate for the last couple of years. And it is definitely below the BC average for that class. So I think if you were to take what if inference you could, it would be that by having a business class multiplier that's lower than the BC average, in general, we would charge less tax on a business here in Squamish than might be charged to a comparable business in another locale. So I think that that meets the policy requirement of encouraging new businesses, in that our business multiplier is lower than the average. So there are other places, obviously, that are more expensive than Squamish. By the same token, I'm sure there are other places that are less expensive from a business tax perspective than Squamish. It should be noted that there are some other items here which I will speak to. So it states port property has a legislated cap of $27.5 per $1,000 of assessed value. Utilities has a legislated cap of $40. We have maximized both those items. And so when you see the term legislated cap, that infers that the province has set a maximum that can be charged for that property class. We could provide a number that's lower than that in both of these industries, in both of these instances. They are industries, admittedly. We've chosen not to. We've chosen to use the legislated cap as our value. The other item of note is Class 4 is major industry. Ports are also are a subset of major industry. They have a specific legislated rate. We do not have a major industry occupant at this point. We had one in the past, and we may have one again in the future, but today we don't. We still need to set a tax ratio for that class, and that's done to provide some indication as to what our views are and what council thinks would be appropriate levels of taxation. We have set that number equal to the BC average for Class 4. Okay? And obviously, if council wishes to adjust that, they may do so. And that's most of the information with respect to tax rates and ratios. And then we're going to talk briefly about how all of this stuff impacts customers and say residents and residents averages from a tax perspective. So here we go. This is a comparison of the various tax ratios, our ratios to the BC average. You'll see that our residential is below average, as are all of our light industries, business, and forestry and recreation. When a municipality has significant increases in assessed value based on rapid growth and or rapid property value escalation, both of which have taken place in Squamish in the last few years. The impact of that tends to be to lower the residential tax rate. And because all of the other items are a factor of the residential tax rate, those numbers would also come down. So we've seen some very significant residential increases in residential assessment over the past few years. And that's brought the necessary tax rate for residential down. And with that, that brings the tax rates down in comparison across the board. So you'll see the gaps here where we're below the BC average. Those have been widening slightly over time since I got here 5 years ago. And that's primarily because assessment growth in Squamish has been higher than the provincial average. So as assessment growth goes up, the rate required to generate the same amount of revenue would go down. So we're seeing a reduction in our residential rate. All of the tax rates that you see here are a factor of the residential rate. So once the residential rate is set, council's ability to manipulate tax burden and tax incidence upon other classes is dealt with through managing the value of the tax ratio. So increasing the tax ratio would increase taxes on a different class. Decreasing the tax ratio would decrease taxes on that class. It should be noted that within a class, all properties within a class must be charged the same rate. So although there are, when you look at the tax tables, you may see different breakdowns of residential, for example. You might see a breakdown of single residential versus strata residential. Even with that, all residential customers are charged the same rate, regardless of the nature of their residential property. In the same way, in the other classes, business, as an example, a store here on Cleveland Avenue, paying the business rate, would be charged the same mill rate, just a term often used, the same assessment rate, rate against assessment as Walmart if they were in the same property class. Okay, so as much as you might want to be able to ding the big box stores more, tax system doesn't provide you with that option as long as they're all within the same property class. We don't set the property classes for businesses. BC assessment does, and those are the rules that the province has given us. So those are the rules that we operate within. Lastly, I think we're down to tax impact on various properties. So this is basically summarizing all of the various pieces of information that we provided today, and it just gives you a quick snapshot of what we think will happen in these various classes. And as you can see, just looking across on the last line of the top section, which is showing the change in average assessed value. Change in average residential assessment was 10%, but strata was significantly higher than single residential. Okay. And you'll also see that change in business assessment was significantly higher. So what that would indicate is that there will be a bit of a swing towards more tax being, the tax burden being heavier on businesses this year. And that's being driven by nothing more than the fact that their assessed values in comparison to the assessed values of residential properties went up by a significantly higher percentage. And then if you go through the bottom portion of the table, you can see a comparison of how these changes in assessment have impacted individual households, or may impact individual households, looking at this from an average. So although the increase in residential is not particularly high at $28 on average, you'll see that on the basis of average, it would appear that single family residences may see their taxes decrease slightly on average, and stratas would go up slightly by much higher amount on a percentage basis. And you can see a fairly significant increase in business tax, property tax associated with business. Again, the increase in business is being driven by increases in assessed value. So lastly, we always like to comment that there are many different neighborhoods within Squamish. And so these changes can vary across the various neighborhoods depending on where you happen to live and how the assessed values in your neighborhood have moved in comparison to others. So I'd like to put up this slide, which shows various impacts on various neighborhoods. And you will see these are representative homes, and the dollar amount changes are negative across the board, but in a way that's not really surprising, because what it's suggesting is that due to lower average increase in assessment for single residential properties than strata residential properties, and a lower increase in the average assessment year over year for residential in comparison to business, single residential homes are going to see their taxes potentially be flat, or may come down slightly from prior years. It's not that the amount of money required from taxes hasn't gone up. It's just that the incidence of who's going to pay for that has shifted this year from previous years. Two more, and I think I got. The next one shows a comparison of two residential neighborhoods for strata, one being here downtown and the other being, Tantalus, so area. And again, what we're seeing is 16% average increase, and one of these is slightly higher and one of these is slightly lower, but both of them are going to pay, are looking at a increase in the $100 plus range, whereas comparatively for the single family residential, we were looking at minor, minor decreases. Lastly, I'm going to look at business, and here again, we're seeing a comparison of a business here in downtown area compared to a leased property in the Tantalus area. And you can see that based on the changes in assessment, you can see that works directly through to the change in the amount of tax paid. And so those areas that had higher assessments or higher changes in assessment year over year are seeing higher tax increases, and those with lower are seeing lower. That is the methodology of tax, how taxes are applied in this community, and what the levers are and that are controlled by council, and how they can adjust those amounts as they desire. Now, that being said, I'm going to go back to this one, which says questions and discussion, and I'm going to turn it back to council and say we would be happy to address any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you for the presentation. And if I could get you to take down the screen, just helps us view the all the participants. And before we go into questions, I just want to remind council of the staff recommendation that we have before us, which is to that the 2023 tax ratios as presented at this meeting be incorporated in the 2023 District of Squamish tax rate bylaw to be considered at the May 2nd regular business meeting. So I just want to, for council, keep in mind the decision we're trying to get to, and I understand there's going to be questions along the way, and I'll let Councillor French kick this off. Take it away, Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor Herford. And I wanted to zero in on the port improvement line. 8 years ago, there was a major fire at Squamish terminals. And I know that when that happened, that had impacts on the taxation for Squamish terminals, and there were impacts for years afterwards. Is that still applicable? Is Squamish terminals still paying an increase related to improvements when that dock was replaced?
Through the chair, there are two tax ratios assigned at the port. One is for land, and another is for improvements. The improvements, as you have pointed out, would relate to, I would assume, I mean, it's long before I got here, so I can't be sure, but would be related to the rebuilding of the facilities that were on that site, and they are being charged at a lower rate. My understanding is that that is an ongoing agreement, and we are provided annually with a specific assessed value for the new facilities that should be charged at the lower rate, and in comparison to the overall value of the total property. So we adjust it year to year based on information that is provided to us by the province. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor French, do you have a follow up, or does that address your question?
I think I have a follow up, and I'm expecting there might not be an answer, which is fine. How much longer would Squamish terminals be paying that improvement amount? Any idea?
Through the chair, I don't have that number in front of me, but we're coming back in a couple of weeks for 3 readings, and we certainly would do our very best to provide that information at that time.
Okay, I think it's more a point of interest at this point than being vital information in making any decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor French. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to wrap my head around the business assessment increases, and because we hear over and over again about the housing affordability and land costs and all of that related to residential, Is that what's putting the pressure on the business parcels or the business assessments? Or is it because there is typically, in some of the examples, residential is permitted as well, and it's really the residential piece? Or just trying to wrap my head around why the business property assessments have increased so significantly.
Through the chair, I can't answer that question. We can reach out to BC Assessment and see if they can provide us with some additional information regarding changes in assessment that are specific to Squamish rather than, averages that may have occurred throughout the province. But we're not doing the assessment. So to be fair, I really can't answer that question for you at this time.
I guess where I'm sort of, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, and I understand why the ratios for business would come down further because the assessments have gone up more and the ratios are already higher. And so the way that math all works out, sort of you look at ratios, it looks like things have really come down for business. But when you look at actual dollars, it's a fair bit more. And I guess I'm just struggling to wrap my head around that and thinking about what's in our strategic plan and where we want to focus our economic development and so on. And are we allowing, if we focus, I guess if we focus too much on the ratios, are we worsening an affordability gap of residential versus business and making it sort of, it's really quote unquote affordable to live here, but not have a business here? Because these things are getting so far out of line. Like, I guess, when is the point when we should start thinking about adjusting these ratios a bit further than what the simple assessment changes would require? Does that make sense? Like, to sort of shift the tax burden a little bit.
Through the chair. Yes, Councillor Pettingill, your question makes complete sense. This is where I get to smile a bit and go, I understand what you're asking, but I think that the question you're asking is the question that we as staff are kind of trying to ask you as council, which is has the balance tipped too far one way or another? And do you want us to do some work to see what would happen if we were to adjust the ratios? What I can say, just from a standpoint of having played around with these numbers a little bit, not in depth. The ratio is currently 2.57. If we were to bring that ratio down, it would reduce the impact of assessment change. It would reduce the ratio being applied to business. Those values would have to be picked up somewhere else. And to be fair, the somewhere else is going to be residential. Okay. Now, there's a lot more residential assessment than there is business assessment. So the impact of a small decrease in the ratio for business would be spread across a much broader base of residential homeowners. So maybe if this is the time that council thinks it's appropriate, they would direct us to investigate that, and we would be able to come back with various alternatives. We don't have a specific alternative scenario that we're able to present to you today, mostly because, to be fair, the change in business assessment was very dramatic this year, and I think council has to try to get their heads around what impact that's going to have, because we're looking at I think it's a roughly 30% increase in assessed value on average for business. To be fair, I'm not quite sure. You'd have to reduce the ratio an awful lot to bring that down, to soften that blow tremendously with an assessment increase of that much. Their taxes are going to go up. I mean, there's no way to get around that.
I can see Ms. Boxford wants to is eager to jump in, so I'll create the space for that. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Excuse me. The workshop's aim and staff's aim is to provide the results of the assessments and the impacts on tax utilizing the current ratios, and then the comparison. So the BC comparison, so that council can take a look at it and go, is this the direction we want to go to? And then advise staff to say, hey, this isn't the direction, or we want to shift this way. Can you bring back a model? So that's our aim here, is to really present those results. You can take a look at them. You have your comparisons. You can see the impact on tax, and then you can bring that. But then you can advise staff to do some options there, or direction. Okay.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hamilton next, and then Councillor French. Did you raise your hand again, or is that? Oh, okay. I'll get back to you when it's appropriate. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah, great, thanks. I'm trying to understand this this change, or the difference between the single family and the strata increases. So first of all, the tax burden is shifting in a way that in the opposite direction that I think it perhaps should. I think that perhaps, yeah, so I'd just like to understand, was the tax increases that are coming from, that are hitting the strata more than the single family, is that solely due to the fact that strata properties tended to increase in value more in as a percent more in 2022 than single family?
Through the chair, the answer to that question is yes.
Okay, thank you. And second question, do we have any lever to change? I think the answer is no, because you said once we only have the ability to set a mill rate for each category, and strata and single family are within one category, so we are legislatively unable to change that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question, and I see the that jump in assessment and business assessment is, really jumps off the page. And I was wondering, were there other times, I've seen other years where it seems that one neighborhood maybe has a bigger bump than others by a large amount. And just to follow up on Councillor Hamilton's line of questioning, we don't have the ability to sort of try to level that, smooth that out for them. Has there been times where there was a residential, like these numbers were inverted and we had a huge bump in residential, but the business didn't move? And I'm trying to understand the historical pieces as this sort of ebbs and flows along, because I don't want to, I just want to make sure that we react appropriately, which might be not reacting just to that change.
Through the mayor, I don't have all of my analysis for the last 3 or 4 years in front of me, but I do recall that in the last 2 years, like coming up to this being year 3, let's say, in the first 2 years, we saw significant increases in residential assessment, 10-15% increases in average residential assessment or more, and business was running around 5 or 8%. So it appears that kind of the seesaw's gone the other way this year, in that residential assessment increases were significantly higher in the previous couple of years, and this year business increase on average is significantly higher than residential. So it may be a case of business catching up to where residential had already gone. But again, it's based on assessment, and I'm not an assessor, so I'm really can't speak too clearly on that.
No, thank you. That was helpful. My reading was this was business catching up, and I'm just trying to really wrap my head around whether some action should be taken to smooth that, or if that is sort of kicking the problem down the road and may lead to unintended impacts. So I'm going to mull that as I go to Councillor French and then Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor Herford. And when I think back to 1990, when I first started looking at municipal budgets, I can't think of any budget year where this type of business increase took place. It's huge. Like I'm very worried about tax impacts for businesses. So to the question, do you want us to do some work to adjust the ratios? As I heard a moment ago from our finance department, my answer to that is yes. And I would like to see what it looks like to take a little bit off of business and shift it over to residential, because I think that has to happen in this taxation year.
Okay. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. I agree with Councillor French. I certainly would like to see what would happen if we attempted to reduce the business ratio. My concern is, just by the way the calculation gets done, that's going to once again disproportionately hit the strata level of the residential tax burden, hitting the residents who are least able to manage a tax increase with the largest tax increase. I think we have a very unfortunate circumstance of assessments happening this year.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just trying to put all the numbers together. Do we understand or know and I apologize if you mentioned this already, but BC-wide or in comparable communities, have we all seen a similar increase in business and residential assessments, or is there something different is happening here?
Through the chair, I'm not sure I can answer that question. I think I would have to go back and look at the assessment data over a couple of years and see what it's saying as far as burden on business and burden on business here in comparison to the overall BC averages, and see if that's moving and whether that happens to be or appears to be moving more dramatically here in Squamish. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question right now.
Thank you. Council, other questions on this? And also want to remind of the question we're trying to get answered here. Councillor Hamilton, is that your hand again?
Yep,
Go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this.
No, it's all good. I just want to make sure we're
single-family
duplicating.
thing. So do we have an understanding? Okay, so I'm looking at the increase in the strata, the average assessed value of a strata versus the average assessed value of a single family home. I know that we put in, there are a lot more new stratas than there are new single family homes in Squamish. Do we know what fraction of that increase is coming from the fact that we're selling new stratas as opposed to continuing to resell used or not new single family homes? How much of it is coming from non-market growth and how much of it is coming from market growth? Do we know?
Through the chair, we certainly can determine the portion that is non-market versus market with respect to strata versus residential versus other areas. If you was wondering if there is a chart included in the report which shows a very high level but summary of that information. I think it's like probably page 3 of the report.
And for council, I believe that's page 29 of 31.
And it shows that the non-market change is just over 3% for strata and just over 2% for residential. So it's slightly higher, but as you can see in comparison to those numbers, most of it appears to be driven by changes in market assessment rather than non-market.
Sorry, how did you draw that last conclusion? That it was mostly driven by non-market? I didn't follow the logic there.
So the last conclusion was that in comparison, the amounts of increase year over year in assessment are being driven by market assessment, much more so than non-market assessment. And that is impacting strata residential more so than single residential. And for that matter, business impact is even higher in comparison.
Okay, sorry to spend one more minute here. I'm looking at this table, single residential, it's on item number 3 on page, I have it on page 2, but that's fine. Anyways, project information, property assessment changes for 2023. The 2023 market for single residential was 7.4% increase, and the 2023 market for multi-residential was 16.4. Those are the numbers you were referring to, saying that the market increase was higher?
Yes, those are the numbers I'm referring to.
Okay, thank you. I understand.
Thank you. Councillor French?
Thanks, Mayor. I wanted to ask about timing. If we send staff back to bring some scenarios to us, would we see that next week or would it be the following week? What's the timing on that move?
I will turn it back to staff to answer, but I don't want to hazard a guess. I suppose it depends on what it would depend heavily on what we're looking at and the lift required to achieve it, but let's, yeah, go ahead, Ms. Arthurs.
Just keeping in mind that the bylaw has to be adopted prior to May 15th. Right, so any changes that it might impact the bylaw? Staff
Okay.
also need time to draft the bylaw.
So we are on a compressed timeline. We've got less than a month to have adopted this bylaw by statutory requirements. So it would have to happen inside that that time frame and how much room we have or capacity we have to shift how far in that time. That's the question. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Or just we are scheduled to return for 3 readings on May the 2nd. And certainly at that time, we would be able to bring council any comparison scenarios that they requested. So if you were to ask us, what would it look like if we change ratios, we would be able to do all those calculations and bring them back at that date. And you could wade through that at that point in time and provide the necessary direction.
Thank you. Councillor French, does that give you the clarity you're looking for?
Yes, and I'm also conscious of availability of our tight schedule around agenda planning. But okay, so what I just heard from finance, I think covers any concerns I would have on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any more questions as we move through this? Yeah, Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think for me, there's 2 questions here, and we've spoken about the one, and that's, we've decided how much money we need to run the municipality, and it turned out actually we thought we needed a 5.9% total increase. We came in at 4.16, and now, so the discussion we've been having is how do we split that between everyone? We're wondering, is it a bit too much on business, and should we shift some of that? So we've had some good discussion there. I guess the piece I'm struggling with is when I think about the other conversations we've had today, some of the money we've put in the financial plan to make sure we can address the community demand for Brennan Park and so on a fairly aggressive timeline. The question was raised earlier today, how do we pay for this, or can we afford to move on any of this given the cost? And so I guess the piece for me is, do we stick with the 5.9% we had originally talked about? Because knowing that to meet the community's demands for action on things like Brennan Park and so on, we are going to need something beyond grants. And, staff has done an excellent job of finding other means. But with the magnitude of these things, I'm wondering how we do that. So if I were to suggest that maybe we should stick with the original tax requirement, there's a bit of a surplus there. Where would that go, or how would we sort of think about leveraging that or putting that towards some of the things we talked about earlier today in our wanting to do in our 5-year plan?
I see a few hands from staff of figure out who wants to go first. Ms. Arthurs, maybe to start.
So procedurally, through the chair, the financial plan bylaw was given 3 readings already, and that was at the 4.19 requisition requirement. So the 5.9 isn't contemplated in the financial plan at this point. It's not part of the tax rates. It's part of the financial plan. So, and that was given 3 readings.
Is there anything else to add? Ms. Boxer, I'm not sure if that was a hand or go ahead.
Through the chair, I just wanted to make sure that was clear and perhaps provide a little bit more context to make it clear if it was not.
Yeah, I guess I saw in this report that sort of requisition number. So I thought we were approving in this report the final requisition number and that it would go into reserve. And so I was sort of trying to elicit just clarity on which reserve that would help us sort of, because it seems there are a bunch of unknowns. That's sort of one of the things we want to do with this work. So it's sort of, I guess, getting ahead of the game is my thinking, knowing that there's a lot of unknowns to come, except we know they're going to be expensive. And so, yeah, I guess my understanding had been that this discussion is about the ratios and that the final requisition number, and maybe I was mistaken on the requisition number piece.
Yeah, Councillor Pettingill, this afternoon's conversation was about setting what that requisition number was, and this is how that's just distributed in the. So I think what you're sort of where you're going isn't. I'll put it in not impossible, but extremely awkward and challenging to accomplish at this juncture procedurally. I'll leave. That's just my commentary. But I'll go to Councillor Hamilton.
I just wanted to echo Councillor Pettingill's, shall we say, confusion. I was also under the understanding that the 5.9 or 4.2% increase was something that could still be modified after the 3 readings of our spring amendment. So clarity on that would be appreciated in the future. I understand that there's lots of stuff. Thank you.
If there's a reply from staff on this.
Sure. Just to add a little bit of clarity and not so much on the procedurally, but more of the mechanics of the financial plan to the tax rate bylaw. So the financial plan establishes the overall tax revenue requirement. That led to 8.94%. We estimate the non-market change at that point in time. At that point in time, we estimated at 3%. What that 3% is those new folios that are added to the group to pay. So it's really that the 8.94 is still there. It's just that the non-market change or the added folks who are going to be paying for it has increased. So in the tax rate bylaw, you take that 37.2 million or the 8.94 and distribute it across the group. And that's the ratios that we're dealing with. So in order to change that distribution, it would have to be at the tax revenue. So you'd have to increase the tax revenue in the financial plan.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. Just thinking of a way that we can perhaps prevent this in the future for next year. If it would be possible for us to have a more wholesome discussion about all of the pieces before having a motion to for 3 readings of something and getting beyond a point where we can change, that would be perhaps appreciated.
Yeah, I think that sort of scoring that would be rather subjective, given that there was ample discussion around what was in and what was out of the amendment. But we will be far more. Yeah, but there's lots of refinement to be done going forward, so we'll see where that goes. Ms. Glenday, would you like to speak to us?
Just to add, if council wishes, they can rescind 3 readings that were made this afternoon. 3rd reading, sorry, not 3 readings, rescind 3rd reading.
So we've heard there are options, but right now it's how whatever that requisition amount is, and that's why the order of operation was, or the order of the agenda was the way that it was. So we figured out exactly what we're asking for through that amendment is the last touch, and then we go to the distribution of that ask. So, but I understand these systems are challenging to work within. So I'm going to go with the Councillor French. I'll go back to you, Councillor Pettingill.
Thanks, Mayor. And the thought of rescinding 3rd reading, I don't like that at all. I'm super nervous about that. And I get the nervousness. I understand, and it's unfortunate that this workshop is at the end of this day instead of where we had originally planned it. But the implications of rescinding 3rd reading, I don't know, it's huge, it's massive. And I've got what I think could be wording for a motion that would direct staff to take the tax ratios back and bring us some options if and when you might be ready to hear that from me.
I think we're ready to hear that on this particular piece of this puzzle. So go ahead, Councillor French.
Okay, so what I have is a motion that would read that District of Squamish staff bring back tax ratio scenarios, shifting the property tax burden to decrease the business tax burden, shifting it to residential properties. It feels clunky, and if anybody has thoughts on how to refine it, I'm open.
Councillor French, I have challenges understanding to what extent. There's a sizable increase there, and so I would be my hesitation in supporting this motion. Although I see where the gist of where you're going, so I'll ponder an edit there, or if anyone else has a suggestion.
Okay, well, and then let me add that my choice, where do I scenarios is, I think, an important word in the motion, because what I'm hoping for, what I'm looking for is some potential options. Big shift, medium shift, little shift, something along those lines.
Okay, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I just want to check in with staff with what's being proposed. Is this, you know, a fairly simple spreadsheet with some quick scenarios? That's what you're hearing and that's what's possible? Or is this, you know, a significant lift in work to do what you are hearing here?
Through the chair, finance would ask for some specific parameters around these requests, primarily that we were able to frame these as specific direction or specific decisions that you want us to come back with, you know, like giving us a range, high, medium, and low is fine, but we will want to know sort of what are the starting points, ending points on high, medium, and low, what that meant as an example, and then we would be able to go away and do this. Moving those ratios, these are spreadsheets within computers, so we're playing around with the numbers and recalculating things. That portion is not the most arduous. The most arduous is once you change the numbers, making sure it flows through correctly, but taking the output, putting the output into a format that we will be able to bring back to you and show some discernible change. You know, if it goes up by $1 or $2, is that a discernible enough change to provide you with the indications that you want? You know, so I think really it's a question of if you can set some general parameters around what you want like how far you want to move the lever, so to speak, so that we have some idea what type of specific set of calculation parameters to put in, we will be able to do that, and we could come back with, you know, a high, medium, low kind of scenario. We're just not quite sure at this point what high, medium, and low would look like. And I thank you, Councillor French, for understanding the, you know, how this is a little troubling, you know, or not troubling, but, you know, it's a pretty broad request. So we need a little bit more specific direction as to what type of output you want to see.
Sorry. Go ahead, Councillor French.
Okay, so I'm just thinking that as maybe a place to start with this, could we see the slide from your presentation that focused in on business, that showed us that dramatic increase that our business sector is facing in increased assessments. Because I'm thinking that from that slide, maybe we could toss some numbers out that could give us some ranges between high and low from an actual dollar perspective.
If you could do your microphone, Mr.
I'm going to bring that back up for you. If you could just hold on for a moment, please. So I think this is the first slide where we showed a comparison across of all the various classes, and you can see that the change in assessment is 10% for average residential and 33% for average business. I guess what I'm wondering is, are you looking for something that would target you using this as a template, let's say? Are you looking for something that's targeting a dollar amount? Are you looking with respect to business? Are you looking for something that's targeting a percentage? And then, once we have a bit of an understanding there, we would at least give us some parameters to go work with.
Okay, so I think that dollar amounts are really tricky. And in this scenario, percentages are probably the easier piece of information to work with. So that number of 22.6% under the business average business column in the row that's labeled change minus percent. So 22.6%. So if we were to look at a lower percentage of, say, what would 19% look like as a bottom end for that particular percentage?
Okay. And again, thank you. We're just trying to get an idea what kind of parameters you're looking for. Then we will be able to go away and we'll manipulate the ratios accordingly to generate something like this. So if I were to take this, would this be an appropriate statement that we're going to view this 22 as the high, and that what you would be looking for is, say, a low and a mid below these values? Would that be reasonable?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And a question on this point before I go to Councillor Hamilton, I have you, and then Councillor Pettingill. As we're just to facilitate this discussion, is there a line on this that's the easier for you to manipulate? That's more of an input than an output, or are they all? Is it all equal, and it can the systems can flow either way, or is there something that's problematic that we should sort of stay away from, or?
Through the mayor, to answer your question, what we're going to change is the ratio. So this gives us, so if we use this as the high point, let's say, that's based on a 2.57 ratio. What we would do is we would then just pick arbitrarily, say 2.5 and then 2.4, let's say, just to pick some arbitrary numbers, and plug them in and see what kind of values they generate, and then provide you with a comparison of what the business and residential impacts would be by changing those ratios.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to see if we were something we should definitely steer clear from, but I appreciate that. So I'm going to Councillor Hamilton and then Councillor Pettingill.
Thanks. If I understand what will happen here, I would guess that a percentage, if we changed, because business is 1/6 of our total role, or the business is sorry, I should have articulated what I wanted to say before I said it. If we look at our total assessment across the district, business is 1.8 billion, and residential is 11 billion. That's a factor of 6. My guess is that if we reduce the tax impact on the business by 6%, we would need a 1% increase in the residential tax rate to accommodate it. That's a very rough estimate, and I have obviously no idea whether that's true or not. But on that, that would sort of set that bar for me. If we could look at a percentage change in the business tax rate down by somewhere in the 6% range to see what the increase in residential would be. I'd also like to point out that I don't think we saw it in the slides, but in the materials, the light industrial tax rate is going up the most by 31%. And its total tax base is a factor of 10, I think, lower than business. So we are hitting light industry very hard with not much to gain from it. So not much like coming out of it. So I'd also like to consider consider light industry in this motion.
Okay, and to be clear, we sort of had the start of a motion, and there's not a motion on the table. So I'll be looking for that from council. Any other comments on this, Councillor Pettingill, and then I'll put myself on the list.
Yeah, I think Councillor Hamilton answered part of my question. So I was saying on this table, average business is that commercial and light industry, and light industry, it's not, it's just commercial. And so I guess what I was hoping or wondering is, hey, if we took this 22.6, drop it to 11.3, just drop it by half, and how does that flow through? Just to give me some sense of how these things are related, and then I can extrapolate from there. But it sounds like, no, there's some other moving pieces, and I'm hesitant. I guess looking where we are, re-engineering all our ratios is a challenging concept, especially when we do know that it's going to hit stratas harder, assuming we shift to residential, which is what we've seen we want to do. So yeah, I'm just feeling a little bit cautious about how far and how complicated we make this right now.
Me too. So I'm going to, on page 29 of our agenda, 29 of 31, we have a table which shows the provincial averages. I don't know, Mr. Russell, did you have a slide that showed that so we can put it to put it up? And this is the average tax rate. Yeah. And so the point that I want to raise by showing this is that at other points, think of when the tax load was the other way around. We have seen different areas of our community, different neighborhoods having different burdens at different times, and in this case, we are seeing business take a big impact. I don't want to diminish the importance of that and the magnitude of that impact. It's a large tax increase that's come through the assessment values. When I look at the BC average here from a tax rate, which is the mechanism we use to adjust this and to articulate how this is valued in our community, that 5.417 is dramatically below the BC average of nearly 10%. And I don't know how much further in the grand scheme of things we should divide that out. That is very appealing. Now there's other factors as we've discussed that get us there. I struggle to I'd struggle, I think, to support a move in these in the ratios, given the increases we are seeing and where they fall inside that more granular level of our residential. I suppose we could look at it, but I'm really struggling to wrap my head around taking that step and putting it onto the residential. The pieces of overall affordability that we're leaving out of the discussion today, or we're looking at mortgage rate increases. There's all these other increases that are out there as well as, and yes, they exist for business as well, but our residential folks aren't having a smooth ride out of this as well. And I'd like to remind council that we do have a smaller tax increase overall than we projected, and dramatically smaller than the rest of the province. So we're having a strange year assessment wise for business, and that is challenging. I just think to positively impact that in a or to smooth that in any way might just be kicking the can down the road to next year, and loading up our residential at the same time. And we're already well below the provincial average on the business ratio. So there would need to be a very compelling case, if at all, to do this investigative work and to shift that burden to the residential. But that's the hill you'll have to climb as a whoever's going to make a motion to this to wade into that. Just really take into consideration the where we sit in the context of the province. And that part really jumped at me when I read the report, and I think that's signaling we're not just signaling, that is being extremely supportive towards our business community. Although there are, this is admittedly a year where the impact is far more acute than it has been for them. Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor Herford, and I'm totally on board with everything that you just articulated. And we'll have to point out that the direction that I'm looking to take us doesn't obligate us to do anything with the information that comes back to us from finance. We very well could look at it and all agree that what we are seeing today and tonight is the best possible scenario, and we ultimately go with tax ratios that are in front of us right now. But at minimum, I think we owe it to our business community to look at this, because I don't want to come out of this process and have our Chamber of Commerce members openly angry with us on the streets, because that's what it looks like right now is we're about to do. And I would far rather send staff away and arm us with information and go with what's currently in front of us and not be able to defend ourselves. We need to be able to say that we at least looked at it.
I'm all ears for a motion. Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, I'd like to put a motion that staff go and revise the ratios such that business tax increases are approximately 16%, and that light industry tax increases are on the order of 20%.
I'll second that.
I just want to get the wording correct so that we're bringing back, so we're not committing to that, and we're just getting the do the assessment or investigate. So I'm just going to get our minute taker to read that back, and I just make sure that we all are clear what we're talking about. Terry, if you don't mind.
Sure. So the motion states that staff revise the tax ratio such that business tax increases start at 16% and light industry starts at 20%.
So I think, so So that was moved and seconded. Does that capture what your intent?
So it's that the business tax rate is a 16% increase, not starts at, but that the increase in the business tax is 16%, that the average increase in light industry taxation is 20%. And yes, I want an investigation. I want to see the numbers. I am not suggesting that I need to see the numbers before I suggest the change.
Okay, so just at the start of your, I'm just going to, we'll check if this is right procedurally, but I'm going to propose that it's like that would be, it's the direction part. I think the parameters I understand is it would be to direct staff to investigate and bring back a report on what the impacts would be, and then the parameter pieces.
Yep. Would you like me to rescind my motion?
Yeah, if you don't mind rescinding that, and then Terry's keeping track where these or doing some editing, and then I'll put forward one that captures that if that's okay. So you're rescinding?
I'll rescind my motion. Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So Terry, what did I come up with there? No, we're sorry, we're having a hybrid of the original motion, and I'm going to shoulder surf you, or could you read out what you have here?
That council directs staff to investigate and bring back a report to council the impacts of a revised tax ratio such that business tax increases are 16% and the light industry average is 20%.
That gets to your, okay, I will make that, I'll move that, and that was seconded by Councillor Hamilton, and I'll speak to it, and then I'll go around. I think, I do think this is worth investigating, and over the years we have seen different, are we getting it? I think we want to clarify that specific enough direction for.
There's a motion on the floor. If staff are asking a question, it's clarifying the motion. Okay.
Yep, go ahead before I go through my rantings. I mean,
if you will be willing to you use the term light industry average increase is 20%. If you could also use the same terminology with respect to business, so that's the average increase.
Yeah,
please.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So, back to my comments. I think this is worth investigating so we can really understand what those impacts would be. I'm supporting the motion for that investigative purposes, and I am rather pessimistic that it'll be palatable for the community and on the residential side. But I'm happy to explore it and to have it and have this piece of work done to better inform the decision going forward. So look forward to seeing the output of that work, and yeah, and I'll pass over to Councillor Pettingill and then French.
Is it obvious then that we're expecting to see the change shift to residential exclusively, but we do want to see the breakdown between single family versus strata? Is that assumed in this?
My intent with this was that it goes to the other taxpayers if we're adjusting those two, and the only folks left really are the residential. So I think that's implied. And then I would expect a similar, without getting too specific with the motion itself, a similar level of analysis that we've seen here today, and a comparison to where we were in this meeting, to the new amounts, what that looks like. And I'd appreciate the reference to BC average as well, as that's one of the contributing factors. So similar to the report we had today, it'll have to go to the other taxpayers. The remaining other taxpayers that have been excluded from this have been residential. So does that provide the clarity? I saw nodding from our finance team as well. So Councillor French.
Thank you for taking my initial clunky and wordy and nonsensical motion and getting us to this point. I think that this is what we have to do. I think that this is simply the due diligence and the hard work that council was elected to do and is expected to do. So I'm looking forward to digging into this information once it's produced.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And I believe that motion, yeah, we don't have to do, there's no, the staff recommendation motion will have to be applied to the future meeting when we come up with the ratio shuffle. I just want to make sure that we got all the way through that as we're invested this time. So with that, yeah, Councillor Penigo.
I just wanted to raise, I think this is the appropriate point, and so cut me off if it's not, but I am not going to put forward a motion to rescind our earlier decision. And the reason for that is more than anything, again, I wanted to find a way to facilitate that conversation about, you know, what I see on the horizon as a number of expenses. We've been wondering how long non-market change is going to allow us to bring down the annual taxes from what we've seen. And you know, that has been a great help to us over several years now, but I do have that anxiety. And so I think just being able to raise that here gets me sort of most of the way of where I wanted to be. I wasn't ready to actually contemplate a change in the tax rate necessarily, but at least start having that discussion. I think in some of the planning work we did include in our 5-year financial management plan, maybe that's the place then where we can have this discussion. So when we're talking about what does municipal mean, what does Brennan Park mean, as we start to get into those details, maybe that's the time to really think about bring in the cost piece to that conversation. Because I think a lot of these previous discussions from my perspective have been like, so what do we want? What do we need? Not so much how's it going to cost. And so maybe that's where this needs to come in, and we will deal with this in future years.
Thank you, Councillor Penigo. With that, I'd be looking for a motion to terminate. Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor French. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you so much for everyone's work today. Big day and lots of great conversations, and we got to where we needed to be, albeit a little bit later than we had all wanted. So thank you very much for your work.
Thanks very much.
And to staff for hanging around with us throughout the whole journey. Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for a monster day.
Yeah. And all the work that goes into getting these numbers.